Okay, looks like we've crossed the 2 minute mark there. Um,
Yep.
just want to welcome everybody to Triton Office Hours today, the 28th of March. I don't have a ton of content today because I wanted to open it up, uh, to some Q&A and discussion if there's any topics that might come from participants. Make sure, obviously, it should be an interactive affair, not just me talking or feeding you information. So I want to make sure we give time to that. But what I did want to quickly touch on today was um, just talking about like a little bit about images. There's been some questions that have come up from various sources around like custom different OSs specifically. So we had some questions about FreeBSD from a few folks. So I wanted to just address a little bit about images. Now we've done in office hours about HVM image building, and that was the Triton Cloud image repo we discussed. And Brian, you mentioned a lot of details on that, and there's some stuff about that in the repo. I think currently there is a few issues um, with FreeBSD specifically that we're trying to iron out because one of the questions came up was um, why isn't there a FreeBSD import available in the stock images, right? Because I think we've had one in the past, so they can only find NetBSD. So hopefully we'll get to ironing those issues out, and then also the reason I wanted to mention the process is that that you want to if you want to build your own HVM images, mention the process again, and if there's things that people have questions on, we can maybe get them um, answered today. So we'll go through that a little bit. So I'm just going to talk quickly, just kind of go through what images are. So this is all from just the docs, and it's pretty straightforward. But images are templates that contain a disk or file system image and metadata, which are there's some stuff there here, which are using when creating new zones or VMs. And images are managed using the image ADM tool. So when you're on SmartOS, when you're on Triton, you can import images from the default image server, images.smartos.org. So if you want to pull down the latest available SmartOS, or there's an LX image that's available from images.smartos.org, you list it, and then you're able to import that to your instance. And then, for instance, on Triton, it pulls that into to be available to everybody, or you can restrict the images that it may be, or sorry, who it's available to. And there's also the ability to add other sources. You can add that using the image ADM sources command. And then after you do that, so if you've used any other like packaging type system, similar to like you do an update, right, to update the local cache so it knows where to go, similar to like when you do an app to update, it goes and grabs what's available and shows you what's available from the sources. So if you have images.smartos.org in there by default, but if you have another place, it will also pull and show those. One publicly available image is datasets.at. I see that. I don't know how many of those are like new. It tells you about how old some of them are. So I see ones that are from a few years ago. So I don't know how frequently that place is updated. But what is kind of cool is they do have a like a little tool on there that you can actually build your VM Atom command on there. So you can actually pick an image, pick some options, and it's kind of similar to what we're putting into the SmartOS UI, right? So you can do something kind of visual. It does, in the end, it doesn't do the same functionality. It spits out a JSON command, which I think the UI can also do. But in this case, it's not tied to an actual SmartOS. It just is going to give you a command to use on your installation. Once the cache is updated, you can list all the available images for use with image atom available or avail there. And then you import an image. custom images can be created. So in this case, you can. There's a couple steps to doing that, but you can create a custom image from a running instance. And so that'll give you the ability, if you have something custom you want to have on an image and make that available to others, or there's some task that you do over and over and you want it to be built into the image, you can do that. And you can also host your own image API, right? So, for people who have security reasons, or you have limited bandwidth, things like that. There's for Triton, there's DC mode or standalone image API. You could use that to host your own image API, so you're not pulling down from images.smartos all the time. Or if you have like a lot of custom images and you want to store them, that's an option as well. So yeah, and if you want more information on that, there's the docs for SmartOS, and then we have some in docs.triton data center as well. And then, as I mentioned kind of at the beginning, and we mentioned this on the previous office hours regarding this, there's the Triton Cloud image repo for building images for HVM. So if you have a specific OS you want to use, a Linux flavor that may not be available in what we already offer, you can use the Triton Data Center / Triton Cloud Images repo. There's instructions on how to do that, because there's a few more requirements that I don't have listed here, but we talk about that on that previous office hours, and it's in the readme.md. And just to kind of give a little bit of backstory on it, it uses Packer templates and Ansible for building the images. So some great tools for doing that. And then if you just look there, images are produced using Packer and the distro's native installer automation mechanism. Ansible is used to prepare the image content. So, the stuff is there to do what's stock, but there's also things you can customize. Swap is disabled in all the kickstarts and pre-seed configurations. Cloud Init is used for provisioning guest time configuration. So I think most OSs that are modern support Cloud Init. I think even Windows has some sort of Cloud Init system available. If not, I think there's ways to shoehorn that in. And I think we have recently built Windows 2019 image. We are not able to make that publicly available for the licensing restrictions of Windows, but it is able to be done. You can definitely build Windows images. And so if you need Windows on your Triton installation, it can be done. And then Triton Guest System D service sets the host ID, root password generated from metadata. So if you ever use like an image on mnx.io and you provision, you'll see it gives you the password and all those things that are generated from metadata, or give you, like in the case of Ubuntu, it has the Ubuntu user and then the root password if you need to get elevated access. And there's demand for some other OSs besides Linux. So if, for instance, we have NetBSD on there. There's been a lot of questions, I think, around FreeBSD. And as I said, I think we're still ironing some stuff out. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to specifically what it was, Brian or Dan, if you have any insight into
Yeah,
what it
so
was.
the issue with FreeBSD is that, and it's actually a problem with NetBSD also. We've kind of worked around it, but not super robustly. Um, the kernel serial interface doesn't work well with our metadata implementation. When the data that it wants to read is over like 512 bytes, it just like hangs indefinitely. And we can fix it by patching the kernel. But we could do that and put out some images, but then if you use that image and then you upgrade your kernel, it's going to pull in stock sources from FreeBSD, and it's not going to have our changes. And you reboot it, and it's not going to work anymore. So that's the issue with it. We're looking at a few different ways to try to resolve that in userland by um, maybe modifying the client somehow. Um, but we haven't been able to resolve that outside of patching the kernel. Um, so obviously a machine that is effectively a time bomb doesn't make a good user experience.
Right.
So while that's available and you can grab the branch and build the FreeBSD image and run it yourself, um, you know, that's totally fine if you want to do that. It's not something that we feel is high enough quality to like put out there and say like, okay, this one is from us. We assure you that it works.
Yeah.
Um, so
Because I know, for instance, on datasets.at, that one other service I talked about, they have an older FreeBSD 12 image that you could grab. I think would still work, but obviously, I think on the time it says like 5 years old. So
um, yeah, but that one only works with
KVM,
KVM.
right?
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, it has the same issue in it in
Okay.
that it can't pull the metadata properly. But those are configured to use DHCP. And KVM provides a mini DHCP server
Okay.
so that the instances can pick up an IP address. And that was something that we decided to not do with Beehive,
Beehive.
favoring Cloud Init instead. Um, and then now we run into this issue. Um, so I don't know if there's a um, Cloud Init for FreeBSD. Like maybe we could try that. I don't know. Like maybe it uses a different way of accessing data with the serial port. But I mean, it's probably going to just use the kernel interface for that. In which case, it's going to be the same issue. So
Yeah.
um, I don't know. We're still stuck there.
Yeah. So I don't know. And the reason I also wanted to put it on there was um, not just FreeBSD, but we've had questions just in general about building custom images. And so the other thing is that, we do welcome if people are trying to build stuff. If you figure something out and you have contributions or you figure something out, you can let us know. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to um, make the image process more publicly available, so that if you do have something you get successfully running, or you figure out the cloud in it, you're able to share that with the community. That's totally welcome as well. Because I haven't gone in and done a build myself, but um, like for instance, figuring out the Windows stuff was really awesome because I know there's demand for that. So um, I think I'll work with Nick and Jonathan, Brian, whoever else, to maybe get documentation on the Windows setup. I think there's still a couple things to maybe iron out that you could figure out manually, which is something around I think the administrator password not setting or something like that. But I know it can be like you set it to something default, and then you can go in and change that password after you boot up. But like I said, we do have successful Windows 2019, and I think the same process will work for newer like Windows 2022 or whatever the newest version is out right now, because they don't change that process too much, luckily. But yeah, there's some other OSs available that you might not see just right now publicly available from us. Um, but go ahead and try using Triton Cloud Images, and as we get people are asking for about like Nix OS and other stuff like that. So, and the nice thing is that using Ansible for some of the stuff, right, is that we've talked about this before, and we mentioned, and Brian, you mentioned this on that actual office hours, right, is that Ansible is really flexible in that it doesn't require Python, although it uses Python. It can use a native interpreter, so it could use the shell or whatever interpreter might be available on that particular OS. Windows, it can use PowerShell. So there's things you can customize
Yeah.
in the Ansible portion that can give you some customization, and you don't have to worry about having an agent on that target OS already. It can use the tools that are available to that OS. And like I said, cloud init. I'm pretty sure there's cloud init for Windows as well, but it might be something you have to maybe install, like do on a sysprep or something. And then I did see something about cloud init for FreeBSD and the other BSDs that I think somebody developed. So maybe there's something we can do there. But if people stumble across anything, please put it in the Discord or other channels, and we can discuss that. But
Yeah, and I'm not sure if the FreeBSD cloud init supports SmartOS as a data source.
okay,
They might have baked in some Linux assumptions in there. I'm not sure. That's something that we'll have to figure out.
yeah,
One thing to note about datasets.at and any
third
third-party
party,
image server. Um, Now, I don't want to sound like I'm just like grumpy and saying don't use them,
right,
but people do need to be aware that images are ZFS datasets. So either a directory style dataset or a zvol dataset. A ZFS receive is a DMA write to memory. So if there's malicious images out there, um, importing those can write to anywhere in kernel memory. Um, the ZFS import basically has like safeties off when it does that. So there's a lot of things that like you can import a corrupted data set.
CFS receive.
Yeah, what did I say?
You said import, which is good for pools.
Oh yes, yeah, that's what yeah, receive. Um, uh, yeah, has some safeties off. And so you know, there could, if it's corrupted, it'll bring it all the way in and then be like, oh, you can't use this. Or if it's specifically maliciously crafted, they could do things where they are writing to certain places in kernel memory, but then like leaving the rest of the image seemingly good. And so you do the import and you have what appears to be a good image and nothing's wrong. But also there was a malicious payload that came along with it. That kind of thing is possible. And so people need to be aware of that and to be aware of who you are obtaining your images from. Um, I believe that datasets.at has a like anybody can contribute an image policy. So um, as far as I know, there's not any vetting of
right.
images that get uploaded there. Um, so uh, take that for what you will. Be careful. Um, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I agree because we've seen stuff with even just things like npm, right? When people change a version or something, and we've seen people try to inject malicious things. So even from quote unquote what you think is a trusted source, um, can be dangerous. So I agree on that. I just happened to mention that because I knew
Yeah,
that was the
and
one that
they
was
could
really available.
like somebody could take um, a legitimate image UUID that we have produced, um, take that UUID and make their own image, call it our name, our UUID, our manifest, everything except like the hash and the data file, you know, and put that on datasets.at. When you look at it, it looks like the same image. It's the right name, it's the right version, it's the same UUID. It's got a forged published by or published at date. Um, and if you don't look closely at the file hash, you might not ever know, you know. So it's not impossible for there to be like malicious, duplicitous images out there. Um, I can personally vouch for all of the images that are on images.smartos.org and updates.tritondatacenter.com. I can't vouch for any images anywhere else.
Right.
Even if they look like they came from us, I can't say for certain that they did. You have to cross-reference the file hash, not just the image UUID, but the file hash on image.smartos.org. If that's good, then you should be fine. I don't think you can trick both image ADM or image API and ZFS with a hash that matches an image ADM and also has a malicious payload on it. So that should be good unless cryptography breaks. But if you're getting data sets from anywhere other than us, just be aware of what you're getting and take the appropriate steps for ensuring your own safety. That's all.
Yeah, and that's one of the nice things about, I think that's why people expect, that's why there's these questions around the FreeBSD and not being there, because people just expect to use images.smartos.org generally. It's like, hey, is this available? Because as a personal user of SmartOS myself, it's like, I don't have another image source. I don't personally use datasets.at or .at or anything like that. So, I generally only use images.smartos.org. So I think that's why there were some questions around it. But the other, the other option, right, is building images for yourself based on images or instances that you've built with stock images is another option. So if you have control over the process there and you have your own server, of course, then security might not be an issue for the fact that you're using a certified or an image that's known to be trusted, and then it hasn't gone anywhere else. It's all stuff that you've built. So, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that, just that, there is, people usually just check the images.smartos.org, for images. And so, I wanted to make sure the build process was also known again. And then if you do have questions on that, let us know. But you can also go back and watch, if you go to the Triton Data Center Office Hours playlist, you can go back and watch that video on some of the build details, which I just did because I was wanting to know the name of some of the stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, it's right there on the video. So I was able to go back and find that.
Yeah. And I'm in favor very much of community efforts and community support and things like that. And like I said, I don't want to sound like I'm just shitting on datasets at AT.
Oh, no.
I very much like that, there's a community effort there. But people need to weigh the risk for themselves. So, and they need to be aware, and that's all.
Yeah, and especially if you're doing stuff that's, you have sensitive data or something like that, you probably have things in place that you need to go through trusted sources or things like that. But effort, and that's why I wanted to mention it, because I haven't used it for anything on images that I've used, but I look at their page and their template and stuff like that. So there's some stuff that they've done that was pretty cool. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. I think that's a topic that's come up recently, and of course, with sometimes there's newer versions of particular Linux installations that people want to have available, and we may not have built it yet. So that's also why I wanted to make this known, is that you don't always have to wait for us to release it. We try to keep up as much as we can, but with more community support like this just comes more availability of newer versions.
Yeah, and I was mentioning to somebody on Mastodon recently. They were asking about how come the LX images are so old, which is their word. And I was like, I just updated those in November, and we try to do like at least twice a year and more if it's warranted. So we've got I've got some stuff that I'm trying to finish up right now. And then after that, I'm going to be looking at LX images and trying to get a new set of those out the door. And I know there's a new Ubuntu 22 or 2404 that is like real close to being released. And so like the question was like, when's that going to be? Like, why is there a preview image of that? It's like, well, we don't do those until they release it, and then we'll make an image for it. So probably if not by the end of April, definitely by the end of May, we'll have new images out, including hopefully the Ubuntu 2404 image.
Very nice. Yeah, it's funny when some people call stuff old sometimes when it's like, not everybody has to have, the latest version, especially with like, depending on the release schedule of a particular flavor of Linux, LTS can be a long time for a certain version, right? And, unless, there's,
Yeah, and none
yeah,
of them are like out of date,
right.
Um, they were current as of the time that they were built, which was November. If you got an ISO then and installed it, like you'd be in the same spot, right? Um, and in most cases, the worst thing you have to do is a package update, which like is something you should always be doing anyway.
Exactly.
Even when there is like a new ISO drop from Debian, you download that and install it. It's very likely that you run an apt-get update, 5 seconds after install, and there's one or two packages that need to be updated because they finalized the CD 5 days ago and something changed recently. Um, it's always like that. You're never going to get images that like have zero packages that need upgrading unless you install it like the same day that we dropped it. But you wait 2 or 3 days, there's going to be packages. So
Yeah, and why I try to encourage people, like, you should stay current with, definitely with security updates, and, knowing what packages and software you have installed that gets updated as well. Because, the other thing too is that you have your OS, but then you have the things that you install too. Like those need to be updated, and updating or upgrading your OS isn't going to necessarily change the software that you have installed too. So there's also
If it
that.
does, we've failed. Sorry, did I? I should say that a little more loudly. And I say this in the context of if you're running certain classes of hardware, you may want to get the latest fixes for Intel's problems. Not that we didn't put one in last week's SmartOS, for example, although the number of systems affected by that particular vulnerability are rather small.
Yeah, that's exactly the case, right? Is there's sometimes there's patches, things that are, it's not addressed, or it's in between a full OS release, and then just like I said with the LTS type stuff, right? There's similar to like Node.js, the even versions are LTS. So like with Ubuntu, I forget the numbering, but like is it like the .04s are the LTS, and like the .10s are like the short term releases, right? So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the .10s are like a 6 month support cycle, and the .04s are 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. So there's consideration to be taken when you're doing stuff that may be production, right? Like, of course, I'll run a .10. I'm weird and I like installing OSs, so I'll just go and download the latest .10 version or something, because I don't need LTS support. I may just be trying something out to see if it works. But if you're doing stuff that's public facing, you're going to want to consider how your path to upgrade is, and making sure packages and things like that are up to date. But we, like you said, Brian, we do try to keep up and make sure things are as updated as we can. But enterprise release schedules are the way they are because companies that run large deployments, or even mid and small deployments, they don't want to have to keep upgrading every few months their entire OS, and that's where LTS support comes in, and they have minor releases and fixes that go in. but those can usually be done with like Ubuntu, like an apt upgrade and an apt update and things like that. So
Right. You can always, if you install an O4 image, and it's only the even O4s that are LTS. So like
okay, yeah,
23.04 was not.
okay, that's what it was. Yeah,
But 2204, yes. 2404, yes. And so if you're on a 2404, and you want a 2210 or a 2304, you can get upgrade to it. Like there's nothing wrong with that, and like it will almost certainly all just work. So
yeah,
there's that too.
yeah. So it's just really just it's keeping track of, I don't know, every company and everything is different, but it's just keeping track of inventory a lot of times, like, what packages do we have installed, what version are they at, what security vulnerabilities do they have that we need to cover. I mean, it's just the same thing as, like, your desktop, like your Mac OS, your iOS. Thankfully we have Dan to help us tell us when an Apple update comes out and the security fixes, so thank you, Dan. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing, like, is there this big vulnerability that I may be vulnerable to? And so keeping upgraded and updated on through some of the commands is important as well, and maybe more important than having to reinstall an OS. Of course, you're deploying something new, you want to start from the newest that you can, but some of your software, something may not be compatible with the newer version, or there might be some breaking changes. That's why major versions come out. So I know I've ran into that a few times myself. Like, I have a piece of software like GitLab or something I'm running, and the instructions, I download the latest 23 or something that's a non-LTS, and the instructions don't come with supported versions of that or something. So there's also other reasons to pay attention to stable releases, in that it might break other stuff. So it's just a matter of keeping inventory, keeping up with that, and we'll try to keep up as much as we can, providing like LX images and things like that. So
Yeah, very little stands still in the software world, and it wouldn't really be worthwhile for us to be producing like new LX images every day or every week. Just to keep up with, like, so that end users don't have to do a DNF update or an apt upgrade, when they first load up the image. They're like several hundred megs for every single one. And like, if we're producing one every week, then it's, highly likely that some of them never get used. And so like the time and resources for that is just entirely wasted. So we have to optimize like, usability and accessibility, and making sure that we're putting our resources into the right efforts.
yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, and just on the continuing front, we'll keep discussing in the channels and things like that, and we'll do what we can, but we'll try to keep up as much as we can. But also, we do appreciate contributions and things like that from the community on what's going on. Sometimes we can't touch every single thing that we have, but you find something that doesn't work or something like that. People have been submitting PRs and things like that, and we've got like some new partnerships, for instance. So we have another large Triton cloud operator. I guess I shouldn't say the word large, but yeah, they're another Triton operator, and they have stuff going on and they encounter stuff. So, and hopefully they'll give back when they encounter stuff, and the same thing with us as well. So the other thing I wanted to quickly talk about, because this was just mentioned, and thank you, Jasper. And I think we had a little bit of discussion about it internally, but we've talked on the previous times about VMware and Broadcom and all that. And Jasper had mentioned in the channel, Proxmox has like released like a migration tool. And then, we've discussed that, maybe there's a tool or something. I mean, I said it was just in a discussion phase. It wasn't like we're going to do this, but, I just wanted to discuss a little bit, like, maybe there's a tool or something that we can expedite, moving things from VMware. I think there's already ways to. I think there's ways to like convert like QEMU images and stuff like that to like I think you can convert it to ZFS or something like that. But I'm not hyper aware of any of that.
Um,
But
yeah, so the QEMU image command can convert from um, native QEMU images, like file-based images, VMware images, um, and raw images. And so you would use the QEMU image command to take um, a VMware image, convert it to a raw image, and then DD that to a ZVol. And then that could be used to boot an instance. But like, it's not as simple as we're just going to copy the image file in. Like maybe for SmartOS it would be, but for Triton it's definitely not, because you need like owner information, you need networking information, you need to make sure that they have the SmartOS guest tools installed. None of that stuff would happen if you just like DD an image from here to there. Um, and so, like, I mean, Triton is a significantly more mature and complex product than Proxmox is. Um,
right,
and so they can kind of get away with things that um, you you need additional considerations when using Triton.
right,
You know, Proxmox doesn't manage like your VLANs and networking for you.
right.
Triton does do that. You put your information in there, and um, we are mutually distrustive tenant safe. Two tenants that don't trust each other can run their things safely on us. That can't be said of Proxmox. Um, so like, I was mentioning to someone the other day about, like databases, and this goes for like XML parsers too. When you do it wrong, things can be very fast and, seem to happen like magic, but you can induce a lot of problems that way. Which, if you want to handle all of those yourself manually, sure, that's fine. But when you start considering like the overall safety of a large system with mutually distrusted users on it, you start turning all of the safety checks back on, and it's not going to be just as simple as Proxmox makes it seem like, um, because they're not taking into consideration um, all of the things that we're taking into consideration um, when you start discussing like importing images from a foreign system. So yeah, I mean, another thing that often surprises people is you can't take a SmartOS standalone image and just bring that into Triton for the same reasons. Like, um, you're not going to have your networking set up correctly. You're not going to have like the instance owners set up correctly. You're not going to have packages set up correctly. All of those things need to be done correctly in the Triton way, or it's going to cause more problems later on. Um, and yeah, it would be nice to have a tool that did that, but it would have to be one that is like you have to pre-fill in all of the missing information in order to do it. So,
Yeah. And so, yeah, that'll be something we'll have further discussions around, other tooling as well. This was just one of things that we've, maybe discussed a little bit, but just saw that come up. And so thought I'd mention it here. But, we're always looking to, like I said, we're starting with the SmartOS UI is like starting to improve the user experience where we can, especially for people who are coming from other places where they may expect, I say easy buttons, but, they expect maybe a
yeah,
feature or something, they expect an easy button for certain things. And while we can't build an easy button for everything, I think it's pretty cool that we're at least, with the SmartOS UI, we're simplifying some stuff because, as we talked about on the previous one, is like, how do we get the user experience to be better from starting from, zero to running instance, right? That is what I like to see is something that just makes that quicker where, I can pop in the installation disk or USB or the image, get it, and I'm already up and running with an instance. And I always use the benchmark of like Apache or Nginx or something and getting to a web page. Like that's my hello world kind of thing. Like getting to hello
yeah,
world is how I look at it.
yeah. And in a lot of cases with things like people have asked before, like, why don't you implement this feature, that feature? And like, oh, you could do it so easy this way. And like, well, there's this, that, and the other thing that also need to be considered. And they're like, well, maybe just deal with all that stuff later. Um,
No.
but having nothing is oftentimes better than having something because if there's nothing that we have provided to import images from VMware to SmartOS or Triton, then it's open ended and
You're not
you
pigeonholed.
can do
Yeah.
what works for you. Um, Whereas if we did something that was like half-assed and worked in some cases, but not in a lot of other cases, we might lock ourselves into something that like we have to support this shitty,
Yeah.
broken implementation forever.
Yeah.
Um, and like it's done in such a way that like makes it impossible to do it the right way later on. Um, Leaving it open-ended means that we're not restricted when we finally do bring something to the table, you know? Um, so like that's one reason why I don't want to rush to like try to create something for this that
Yeah.
is not going to be comprehensive. I'd rather have a fully mature or at least fully fledged out um, product feature that um, has been well tested and um, well designed rather than just like, okay, well, I wrote a script and it works. Like we had the migrator script inside of Joyent for years that we used. Um, and it was basically a ginormous shell script would ZFS send the data sets and copy the XML. Um, but like along with that, it had to do like 100 other things. And like the first version of that just like copied stuff over and um, like needed manual fixing like over and over and over again. Um, like if that shell script was just like shipped with, shipped on the head node, um, we would basically have to support that for forever. Um, and the implementation of migration that we ended up with in Triton is far superior to that like fragile bespoke shell script. Um, and so like, having some like ad hoc utilities that like kind of work can be helpful in order to like better understand the problem. Um, but again, like I would much rather wait till we have like a well-designed system that we're confident in rather than something that just like kind of grew organically over several years and like maybe works in most circumstances, but in some circumstances it's completely broken.
Yeah, and you don't want to get pigeonholed into something like you said that may be janky or something, and then of course you don't want to waste work or time on something. And so like I said, it's just just jumping into the discussion on it. There's nothing, we're not building that or making any decisions there, but just at least just wanted to
Right.
throw that out, that that the conversation, because it just happened to pop up on the chat, so just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. And there are some things that are in Triton that I consider to be like poor design choices. And there are things where like it's not really practical to change them now. Um, and it's unfortunate because like we're kind of stuck that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and so and then just wanted to give time. Let me just check the chat as well, but just wanted to give time about to if there's questions or topics. Anybody in the audience had questions or anything they wanted to discuss, please let me know. Please jump in and or put it in the chat if you need to. But yeah, I just wanted to make it interactive. So does anybody have any things that they were wanting to discuss or had an idea about?
It's okay to speak too if you want. We don't bite. No, these days we 64-bit word. Sorry.
And Brian Ewell asks, can you enumerate the poor design choices of Triton? He actually specifically asked that of you,
might
Brian.
enumerate them. Well, so one that we ran into recently was um, uh, all of the images that we're producing now are compatible with both KVM and with Beehive, and there's no way to express that in the image. So you can have like no brand preference, which is fine, but some of the Beehive images only support BIOS. And I can't put in the images, this is compatible with KVM and Beehive, but only if you use BIOS, not with EFI. That set of properties is not valid in the like image schema validator. And so like that's if we had thought ahead about it, it's a perfectly valid condition. Because the actual like data image does behave that way, right? But that can't be expressed in the image manifest. And if we were to update that, then everybody else in the world who has an old version of the validator, there would be images out there that we would produce that they cannot import and cannot use. And it's like you have to update everything to latest in order to be able to use these images that you should be able to use. Like there's no reason that you can't use them except that the validator didn't think ahead to this condition. So like that's one. And it comes to mind because I was dealing with that fairly recently. But there's a few other things that I can't think of off the top of my head. They're not like there's nothing that is like so very fundamentally broken about it. Um, but um, you know, having the knowledge that I have today and looking back over the past 10 years, there are things where I'm like, okay, yeah, the decisions that they made at the time could have been better, but they didn't have the knowledge that I have today. And they were making the best choices that they could. Um, it's not always the right decision. And, some things you get locked into. Um, I guess another one that I might point out is like how closely Joyent tied their own identity into SmartOS and Triton. Because we have like uname minus v is Joyent underscore timestamp. The image or the instance brand is Joyent instead of something more generic like SmartOS. Or like package source brand. Like I think OmniOS calls it package source brand. Um, there are some ways where like the Joyent identity is like very intricately tied in with SmartOS and Triton in a way that we can't separate. And I kind of tend to think of those things like, uname minus s still says SunOS, right?
It's like that.
And so yeah, like there's some history of like where we came from, and like it's in there, it's never going away. But looking at it in hindsight, I kind of wish a different choice had been made. So that's all. Yeah, hindsight is 2020-ish.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and like we said, we just dealt
We have
with.
at least
Oh, go ahead.
one more question. No, we got one. We've got a couple more questions brewing
Sure.
in chat. There we go.
Okay, so C. Rust said, I've tried to run a host node on a server with 32 gigs and found the Postgres Manta database took way too much memory to leave the system close to workable. Is that just an effect of the 32 gigs of RAM being a bad amount?
Do you mean host node or do you mean head node the Manta database? Yeah, I don't run Manta and Kiwi Cloud, so I don't have operational experience to help.
We'll see if they'll clarify here. Head node.
Yeah, or do you mean Manatee?
Yeah.
Okay, so
head node.
So head node and Manta. If you're running a like coal scale Manta, like when you do the Manta installation, you can specify the size. And there's like coal, lab, and production. If you're not doing it in production with real hardware and specifying production, then there are a lot of constraints about like how Manta would operate normally that kind of get broken in that case. And so if you're doing like if you're running a single node, even if it's a single like physical hardware node, and you install a Manta and you say size coal so that everything goes onto the head node, there are things that are not sized correctly. And like we know that it's really only intended for like development purposes so that you can like make it like the API function, even though like we know it's not going to perform correctly. Like memory sizes are almost certainly not going to work right. It's not going to have like a data capacity that you would ever want to, consider worth using. There's no redundancy involved in it except like only like absolutely minimally. Like there's a primary and a sink manatee. There's not even an async manatee, right? And there's only one shard, and you have to put your index and your metadata stuff like all in that one shard. You don't get to spread out across multiple shards. So that's just a consequence of like trying to run the dev mode version, that like throws a lot of those considerations out the window. Somebody was asking about, um, trying to do a bunch of like tests with Triton, and they're like, "Oh, all this stuff is broken." And once I dug into it and I figured out what they were doing, I was like, "Well, that's because like you disabled all of these safety checks, because you put the head node into development mode, which like is fine if you're in development mode, but certain things just flat are not expected to work the same because you're in development mode. Like that's what development mode is." Um, so if you're talking about Manatee itself, which is the Postgres database for Triton and not Manta, um, 32 gigs should be fine. I run my head node on 16 gigs and it's just fine.
I put this in chat too. A lot of it is a function of what your swap device is, quite frankly. If you're booting
Yeah,
with
that might be the
SSD
case.
storage, if you're booting with SSD storage, 32 is enough for Triton only easily. You just got to give it the small number of minutes it needs to bring itself up when you boot it from scratch.
Yeah,
And if you don't have an SSD, if your only storage is spinning Rust, you can still run it in 32, but you may hit, oh gosh, I have to restart this service because it timed out, and you may have to manually intervene after a boot from scratch. But once it's up and running, 32 is fine. Its RSS is not horrible, and you're not swapping all that much. I mean, maybe that goes up with more compute nodes. I can't speak to it, but a small Triton with 10 or less compute nodes, you can easily run on a 32 gig head node easily.
yeah. Like I said, I run my head node, with I have 3 compute nodes, so four nodes total, and I only have 16 gigs of RAM, and it works fine. Um, so like there may be some other considerations that you need to look at, to figure out what's going on. Um,
The questioner mentioned that it may be the swapping to spinning Rust timeouts that need a little kick might be
okay,
happening.
yeah, that's possible that's what it is. Um, the head node by default provisions about 45 gigs of RAM, um, and like 3 terabytes of storage space. And even if you have only that much, that doesn't mean it's not going to swap. Um, so, um, the general recommendation is that, your head node should be approximately as powerful as your other compute nodes, because you've got a lot going on with it. And you want it to be able to perform adequately, in a production environment. But like in testing environments or like a home lab environment, it's totally fine for it to be over provisioned, even severely. But there are some tuning considerations that you're going to have to like look more closely at yourself. So, and hopefully that covers what you were asking.
Thank you, C Rust or Crust. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it. C Rust is typing right now, so we'll get an answer shortly.
Yeah, and then just the mentioning that coal, is a compromised development environment. Yeah, so it's meant to fit in a smaller space. So that's,
and these days you can use the ISO installer.
Yes. Yeah, because I think
I do it every Triton release from scratch.
Yeah, because just quickly on coal, right? Because it was used, coal was used heavily for development, right? It was so, if you go back and look at old videos, you could have, you're doing like a development or something, you don't have to have a whole access to an entire Triton installation. You could run that, from your laptop and work on stuff, but it wasn't necessarily meant to, actually do instances and things like that in a full scale. So and he says they say, yeah, I have a much bigger server to use, just playing with a much quieter home lab server. Yeah, I've been in that situation as well. I actually need to try that out because I do have a server. It's an older server, but it does have 128 gigs of RAM, so I figure I could try that.
Dude, you'll be set.
Yeah. So
how old are you talking?
Oh, it's got to be at least 6 or 7 years old. So,
oh, dude, you're post Skylake or post Haswell, very east. And I'm running nothing but Haswell and KB Cloud, and that's all 2014 model year CPUs. So, yeah, 128 gigs. That's joy. Yeah, you should be able to do that easy.
Yeah, and I got a good. It was just I just happened to. I was like, I want a lot of RAM, so I picked that.
Yeah.
But I do want to have more of that. Is there any more? Maybe I check chat if there's any more questions, or if somebody's typing. So I'll give a chance for some more questions to come through.
Brian Ewell is typing.
Right now. We have we'll go over a little bit here. We have a few minutes. But
if you have to drop, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, dude. It's okay.
Oh no. I'm just saying, no.
No, I meant Brian, not
you.
Okay.
Okay, good. I was like, yeah.
You stopped typing when I said his name. I'm sorry.
Don't stop.
It's okay. Like I said, we don't bite. Yeah. We 64-bit word.
Yeah, we love having participation and more questions. That's what this is for.
Nobody likes the bad jokes. All right. Oh, cute. All right. And we have one more person typing. Yeah.
Peter is typing.
Yeah, Cole.
There we go. Is there an option for unattended? Brian, Brian, you got this one covered.
Yeah.
This is your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So first, I'll touch back on Cole very briefly. The official acronym for that is Cloud on a Laptop, and it's like you have a full operating system that you're running, but you need to do development work for it. So you run cloud in a single VMware image. Not at all meant to represent like what it's actually going to be like to run in production. But you should be able to get the APIs functioning enough to like develop additional facilities in the APIs. So yeah, cloud on a laptop. Okay, unattended install. Yes, you can do unattended install. What you do is you provide an answers.json file on the installer media. And the installer, as it boots up, will look for that file. If that file exists, it will obtain all answers available from that file and either pre-fill them in the install wizard, or if you have like the skip instructions and brief headers options also set, then you won't even see the questions for those things. It'll only ask questions if there's an answer that's missing from the answers.json file. If you're missing things in there, you won't get into a situation where you just have like empty data for it. It will prompt you for whatever's missing. So if everything's pre-filled in, it will go like start to finish completely unattended. That's how we do the Equinix Metal installation system. There's a script for that you can say like Equinix Metal, here's my credentials to use Equinix Metal. Make me a head node, and we pre-fill all of the information for the head node installation from the Equinix Metal metadata service. So the machine will boot up, get its metadata, generate itself an answers.json file, and it'll do the entire installation non-interactively. And then about 11 to 12 minutes later, you have a head node that's running and you just SSH into. So the caveat with this is if you put in wrong data, there is some some data validators, but when you're using the answers.json in fully non-interactive mode, some of those validators don't run. So it's possible to put like your gateway outside of your subnet prefix, and then your networking is broken. So you need to make sure that you have like that information correct. And as long as it is correct, then you should be fine. Everything will work.
Yeah, works similar
So
to. Oh,
we
go ahead.
also have answers.json support for standalone SmartOS as well. So there was partial support for that going way, way, way back. But the like Z-pool configuration was one that had been left out. And so I added that in earlier this year. So I don't remember the exact date or earlier sometime last year. It was 2023 sometime. I think about mid-year ish was when that got merged in. So if you want to do a fully unattended SmartOS, as long as you have a PI that supports specifying the zone or the Z-pool information in the answers.json, then yeah, it can go fully unattended as well.
Yeah, pretty similar to what you'll find in other like Windows, the auto unattend.xml and kickstart file. So if you ever use those, it's very similar to that.
Yeah.
Really similar to
Yeah,
easy.
and all of the keys that are valid for an answers.json are fully documented. So all the information that you need to know in order to do it is there and available.
Yeah, I just posted 2 links. One to the template in the actual repo, and then I posted the example from Equinix install, which asterisk we that needs to be updated with some new stuff due to some major changes in Equinix Metal, like the metros and things like that. So that isn't 100% valid, but the answers.json information in that page is valid.
Yeah.
And then Sierra
Yeah,
asks,
I can get a
okay.
head node installed in Equinix still.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I can actually join a compute node to it, because now you can only specify metros. You can't specify them to be like hard requirement to be in the same data center, and they need to pixie boot. So like we probably need to figure out something about that. In order to make that stuff work. We do have support for multi-subnet admin networks in Triton. The feature is called rack aware networking because it was developed inside Samsung with the intention of having each rack have its own subnet. But it doesn't have to be racks. And so I think we might be able to leverage that in order to get it to work in Equinix Metal. But it's going to take some like research time for me to get that going. And there's not a lot of people that are like beating our door down to run Triton in Equinix. So like it's on the list, but there's other things that are going to be more beneficial to more users sooner. And so those things are high priority.
Yeah. I just really loved having the ability to spin up like a full Triton cloud in 20 minutes. When I did it, I was like, this is so cool. Like I got it up and running.
Yeah.
Had a compute node. I was able to provision an instance and publicly access that instance from an IP address with, Apache and Nginx running or HA proxy. And I was just like, oh, it was so cool. I was like, I have a full Triton cloud available to me and I can tear it down. And it didn't cost me, $1,000 or plus of used hardware to get. I was just able to use it, and I actually had the free credits too. So that was the cool thing, is that you play with it and it didn't cost a single dollar. So that was fun. But hopefully we'll get at some point get some work on that, because thanks to Equinix and their major breaking API changes, which I know they gave notice of it, but
yeah,
still, it's like, come on now, people are using this. I mean, I guess you got to keep up with it, but it is kind of annoying. So
Yeah. I mean, I think most people don't have nearly as strict a requirement for same data center as like Triton actually has.
Yeah.
Um, so like
Yes.
I get it.
Yep.
It's
Speaking of
unfortunate
locals.
for us. But
Well, the only thing I
yeah.
wish they could have done was like still, this is always something, APIs, right? Is like they could have still kept those definitions in there and then on the back end like translate it to the Metro so you could still, not have to go modify every script you have. Like, okay, yeah, you can't use the same, thing, but somehow it would just convert to Metro if the stuff still worked. But yes, like he says in chat, again, speaking of long-term support, sometimes, luckily, it's not Google where they cancel a product after X amount of time that somebody seems to heavily rely
Right.
on, but still frustrating nonetheless. And then CREST did that. Dan, is the SDC factory reset, is that to address the Z-pool zone question as
Well,
well?
yeah, no, SDC factory reset will put a little property into your zones pool, which is the default system pool for SmartOS and Triton compute nodes and Triton head nodes. That the next time you reboot SmartOS, it will import that pool and go, oh, look, it's marked for demolition and destroy it. And then it will kick in an installer, assuming you booted with an installer media, whether it's USB, ISO, yeah, whatever.
Very cool. Thank you.
Good Lord. Sorry, I'm laughing at Go Kiss Me here. Oh my God, yeah. Killedbygoogle.com. I didn't even know that was the thing. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I can't. Yeah, people started getting things like Gmail is being sunsetted, and I was like, of course, it's really not. But nice joke to play, I guess. Looks like Jasper is typing something in the chat, so we'll wait there. Hope there's a bunch of tests guarding that functionality. Yeah,
Oh, SDC factory. Hold on.
yeah,
Factory reset. Yeah, you have to answer yes twice.
yeah. What is that? The Linux
Yeah.
command?
Also, if you, um, even if you do that and you end up with
Yeah.
a destroyed Z pool, if you find yourself in that situation, it is still recoverable. So
Actually,
I
the
have
pool is
taken a
destroyed
head node
after.
with.
Yeah, after SDC. Are you talking about? Are you talking about restoring a destroyed pool? Are you talking about restoring a pool that's marked for demolition with SDC factory reset? Those are different
one
things.
one that has been destroyed.
Oh, goody. Yes, 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 yes.
I have recovered those. So it is possible.
There you go.
The problem that you have, or that you can have, is if you destroy the Z pool and then you define a new Z pool using those exact same disks, then you're too far gone.
Yeah.
But if you have just destroyed the Z pool and the system booted up and it's like, okay, the installer is ready to go. If you stop there and you come get help, that can be recovered. I have done it more than once in the past. Something to prove I'm not drunk. Yeah. So Manta has a feature where it's like this is a production system and does not allow resetting Manta. Triton doesn't have that, but like maybe that's a good feature to add. But like what to do about all of the existing installations that don't have this like feature built into it. You know, that's something that I would need to figure out an appropriate way to handle it. So yeah, this is what it looks like if you try. And if you what you need to do is like you run that command and then you push Y and then Y again. You don't ever push enter. Like I have many times before, the first question comes up and I say yes, enter. And then it's like, okay, not doing it. I was like, Oh yeah, I forgot. Like you don't push enter. So um yeah, but like um considering like that you didn't even know that that feature was there, um it's fairly safe. The only people who have ever accidentally ruined their head node that way were um uh like people who were doing development work um and not paying attention to where they were slinging commands around at. Like they thought they were doing a compute node, and they actually did like the head node of like their dev situation. Um, so yeah,
It's like the like I put in there like the intern doing the RM dash R asterisk, warning command or whatever.
right, yeah,
Or
um,
dropping tables on the production database. It could be
yeah.
dangerous.
Um, but yeah, it's fairly safe from doing it accidentally. Um, but you know, maybe there is something there worth looking at to like flag a head node as like this is a production installation. Um, don't allow SD factory to set. Because like you can set zones like individual instances. You can flag them as indestructible um, in Cloud API, and then like um, you can't delete them through the API interface. But if you did like, SSC factory reset and then reboot, it's still going to destroy the pool. Um, so yeah, I can think about it, but there's still like the legacy history of all the installations that aren't going to have this flag and how to um, like appropriately apply the flag. Um, And then obviously, like it's only going to work if you're running that platform or newer. If you downgrade to a platform that doesn't have this feature, you know, it's still, as it exists today. So, but yeah, I'll think about it and see if I can come up with like a good balance there.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. He has to leave, but thank you to Dan. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Is there any other questions or things that we wanted to cover? Please, either you can unmute and talk. We'd love to hear your lovely voice, or you can continue to type and chat. So we'll give people a chance to catch up here. Another thank you for Dan. And just while we're waiting here, just thank you everybody for participating in just Discord in general. It's been great for communicating with everybody. Peter asks, future roadmap for Manta. Good question.
Yeah. So the future roadmap for Manta is we would like to land the buckets feature. It's kind of a um, experimental state right now, which means mainly like they're like the interfaces are not set for it. Like it's usable and it's probably fine as is, but we don't guarantee that there will not be breaking changes yet. So that's what experimental means for us is we don't guarantee to have no breaking changes. Um, once something is out of experimental, um, then we will make every assurance possible to never have breaking changes. without like major version changes. Like with Manta, we went from like Manta V1 to Manta V2, and like there were several features that were dropped from the product to like streamline things. Um, so that kind of thing. But like that's the major thing with Manta is we'd like to land the buckets feature.
Yeah,
Um,
buckets and S3, right? Compatibility at some point.
yeah, well, so
The buckets
buckets
is that.
would, yeah, buckets will make it a lot easier to have that S3 compatibility, um, because um, like with the directory style of storage that doesn't translate nicely to um, the um, the mode of using S3. Like the way MinIO did it, it basically like you'd say like S3 create a bucket and MinIO creates a directory for you. And the way Manta directories work is that it's hashed based on the directory name, not the entire key name. Um, and so um, all objects within one directory are on the same Postgres shard. And so if you have a lot of like heavy activity in that one directory, you have one super hot shard and all of the rest are idle. Um, and so like buckets, one of the key things about it is that it hashes on the entire key name. And so things are going to be spread, like load will be spread across all of the Postgres instances, and you're not going to have hot shards. Um, and so doing that and having like a similar paradigm to how S3 works, where you say create a bucket and you have a bucket, and now you can put things into that bucket, will translate a lot better to the S3 API. And S3, in a lot of ways, like it just uses like HTTP verbs, you know, put, get, delete. And so Manta uses those same verbs. So it'll be a lot easier to have a compatibility layer once we have buckets. So
Yeah, and that will just enable, open up a bunch of different tooling and things like that that I know people are using, right? A lot of programs. For instance,
yeah,
like Terraform, you could use S3 as a backing for state, and they did have a plugin for Manta that they ended up that's not supported in the newer version. Excuse me. So that would be another just tooling that you might use would be more compatible.
yeah. So like buckets is the thing
Yeah.
mainly, and that's going to um, like enable the next wave of um, uh, innovations with Manta.
Yeah, and then Peter mentioned encryption would be cool in the S3 functionality.
Yeah, so Manta already does support uh, I think server side and client side encryption. Um, so that's available in the SDKs today.
Very cool. Another question coming in. I'm just lurking. What's Manta?
Um, Manta is our object storage service. So if you think of like S3 or Ceph, Manta is an HTTP based key value object storage system. It presents as an HTTP server, so you can put objects to it. Like you could take like your website and put it all into Manta, and then point a browser at it, and like it will all just work. So like all of our downloads for like Triton and SmartOS, like we put them in Manta, and then you can just like click it with your browser and download them, or use curl or wget, things like that. Um, but it's a large scale object storage service. There was at one time the fifth largest storage system in the world was a Manta installation.
Yeah, and it does. You can do things like Fastly and Cloudflare too, with that. Is that correct? Right?
Yeah, or varnish or something
Or
like that,
Varnish?
and put
Yeah,
a like an accelerator in front of Manta. Yeah,
yeah. So that's an advantage too because I know if you have, like, for instance, I think back in the Joyent days we had Manta and we had these other data centers, but we only had Manta in East. And so, things like where you have like a high number of downloads, a CDN or accelerator will make a lot of sense if you have something public and you want users to be able to get it faster.
yeah. Manta makes a very good place to store the canonical copy of your objects. It does not make a good CDN, and we had like Condé Nast linked, like had a Vanity Fair article about the last episode of Game of Thrones, and all of the images that they used in that article were stored in our Manta, and so yeah, it almost melted down from the amount of activity of like pulling those objects out. Um, so if you have like a very high read workload, um, it's good to have a cache in front of it. Um, so yeah, it's not a great CDN, but it is a great like safe place to store objects. Like if you put something in Manta, like you have a extremely high assurance that you will always be able to get it out.
Yeah, and then you can also have redundancy, right? So you can even set that, like when you store an object, you can have it like default to two or more, so you can have
Yeah,
it
you
stored in
can
multiple
you can
places.
specify the redundancy level in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's another cool feature. And then um, CRest mentioned there's a data store you can set up shell jobs that will run on data local to the data. Um, so that was one of the biggest
Yeah,
things I will
that's a
say about
Manta
Manta.
V1 feature
Yeah,
where you could say uh, like Manta log into this object, and then you get a Unix environment with that file like mapped into it, and it actually like ran a zone um, on the storage node that had your physical objects stored on it, and it was just like mapped into the file system, so there was like no network access there, like no latency. It was just like writing directly to disk. But um, uh, there were some things about jobs that didn't scale properly,
yeah,
and it was a feature that Samsung didn't want. And so when Manta V2 was created, they opted to drop jobs then. It's a super cool feature, and um, if I had the resources, I would like to bring it back. Um, but it's it's for sure something that's going to take more than just like me hacking away on it, um, for a couple of weeks in order to build something. Um,
yeah. And
so
I was gonna say one of the
yeah,
biggest comparisons, just on jobs, but is like, like in AWS or something, you might have like a large map reduce job or something. You have to like move that data onto where you're gonna do the map reduce or whatever and move it back, like you just said, a bunch of network bandwidth and transit and all that. And the cool thing about jobs was you could do the operation there at the data. There was like, it was a time saver and a money saver in those regards, that you didn't have to move all of your data around. You could perform the job there. So that was a big, huge advantage. Um,
yeah.
and
PTR asks, "What's the minimum
yeah,
install size for testing Manta?" That's a great question, and there's multiple answers to that. So first of all, there is a thing called Mini Manta, which mimics the Manta API, but doesn't actually run any of Manta. You can install that in a single zone, and wherever the quota is for that zone is how much storage you get. So like that's one way to do it. If you want to actually experience Manta for real, the minimum is running a coal-sized installation. It goes entirely on your head node. You get to test out the API. You can kind of see how it works. Like we were saying earlier, some of the like constraints are turned off there, so it's not going to perform adequately. It doesn't have adequate data redundancy. It doesn't have adequate service redundancy. So that's one way to do it if you want to do it very stripped down. If you're talking about doing a real Manta, the minimum size for full redundancy is 5 compute nodes other than the head node. So you have the head node, 3 metadata nodes, 2 storage nodes. That's the minimum for full redundancy. You can also do multi-DC redundancy. And so the minimum in that case would be 18 total compute nodes. So 5 for Manta per data center, plus 1 head node per data center, total of 18 compute nodes. And again, that's like the absolute like smallest like production size Manta that you could have. It's probably going to fill up fast and not last you very long. If you are looking at deploying Manta for like for your business, either to have it internally or you want to use it as a service, get in contact with us, engage our solutions architect resources, and we can help you right size your Manta for your current needs and your projected growth.
Yep. Okay. Well, we're kind of coming to the end here because we have a little. I'm running out of time here, but there's one more question right now from C-Rust who said, "Can you review the differences between V1 and V2 and would it make sense to run V1 if you wanted to do jobs?" So would the main difference just be jobs, right? Or
yeah. So well, so there's jobs. Like the main things are jobs and garbage collection. So the way garbage collection worked in Manta v1 is that daily the system would go look for objects that should be freed. So in order to do that, because there's a feature of Manta v1 called snap links, which basically like you have 2 keys that point to the same object, but you can like update one key and then your other key doesn't change. Okay, so let's say you have like you're making a backup of your database like every single day, right? And your backup server just says like put the object to like my/store/db backup, and that's just what it does all the time. And then you have another system that says make a snap link of db backup named db backup dash today's date, right? And so every day your backup server just puts the db backup one, and then after that your other thing like makes a snap link to that daily snapshot, right? And so your DB backup will always write to the same place, but your snap link will always maintain like exactly what it was at the version when the snap link was made, right? I'm not sure if I'm explaining this like clear enough for like how it actually works, but the thing is you can have 2 keys that point at the same thing, but when you have an object that's freed, there might be another key that's pointing at the object that was freed. So you can't just like, just because there was a delete or an override on an object, you can't just free that object. You need to make sure that there's no keys that are looking at it, right? So because of that, garbage collection was an asynchronous process, and it ran once a day. And with the volume that Samsung had going on with the 5th largest storage server in the world, garbage collection couldn't run fast enough. So there was more stuff that needed to be addressed in a day than the system could actually process in a 24-hour period. Um, and so Manta V2 uses a real-time garbage collection process. And so if you delete something, it will actually be freed from disk within a couple of minutes. But as a consequence of that, we had to eliminate the snap links feature. So now if you want to have like a daily like rotating version of your thing, you have to put it to that key specifically. So you have to put it in two locations and have like two actual like distinct copies of the thing. Um, so in a lot of practical ways, there's not really a difference with how it works out long term, but there's some semantic differences there. Snap links was kind of a cool feature that almost nobody used. So it was very easy to say the benefits of garbage collection far outweigh the benefits of snap links. So we dropped snap links so that we could get the better garbage collection. And then at the same time, jobs didn't scale properly to the size of the Manta that Samsung had. Like in the old Joyent public cloud, the storage nodes had 128 Manta compute zones on them. And so when we did that with the number of compute nodes that Manta had, or that Samsung had in their Manta, it basically like obliterated the Postgres instance that had all of the job data on it. And so it basically like just broke jobs entirely. And it was like, okay, well, what would it take to fix this feature? And like it would have to be redesigned, like with all these considerations and like various like scaling stuff. And Samsung was like, we don't even want that feature, so why don't you just not? And so that's what happened. Um, yeah, so that's a casualty of Samsung. Um, but like they really wanted buckets, and so we started developing that. And it was really close. And then they were like, "Oh, just kidding. We made a deal with Microsoft, and we're going to like put all of our storage into Azure Cloud." And so we don't even want Manta or Triton anymore. And it was like a political business decision way, way high above even the people who had decided to purchase Triton and Manta. Like they didn't even have a choice about it. It was just like handed down to them. You will do this because it was like something like conditional on like being able to get Windows for like their tablets or like their PCs, something like that. Some, deals made with, fat guys smoking cigars. Very far removed from any technical decision. It was a political business decision that saved them like some amount of money in some certain way that made a, super high up exec like got to like hang a gold star on like his accomplishments for the quarter. And that's why it happened.
So
So
would it? And there's the second part. Would it ever make sense to run V1 if you wanted to be able to do jobs? Is that still like feasible?
yeah, you can, but the installer is will do V2 by default now. You kind of have to like finagle it to do V1. And there are some things about V1 that are making it difficult to support, like the Muskie, which is the API component, runs on Node v0.10. Manta v2 runs on a newer version of Node, one that's actually like remotely compatible with our modern era.
Yeah.
And so, like, I looked at what it would take to upgrade Manta v1 Muskie to like a modern version of Node. And it is extremely difficult. There's a ton of changes that have to be made. And just comparing like the Manta v1 and v2, just like looking at the diff there, it's really hard to distinguish like which things are deleting jobs from the system and which things are like necessary API, um, like node API compatibility changes. Um, and so like it would probably be like a good 3 to 6 months of work just to get that one component updated to be like modernized. Um, so it's not likely something that we're going to get into in the projected future.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. Oops. Yeah, jobs is really awesome. Like, sounds really awesome. Yeah, there are some cool things that can be done. I mean, the whole premise of it was really interesting, especially when it was first coming about. Um, it at the time, I thought
Yeah,
when it was described to me, it was like revolutionary. I was like, that makes so much sense. The compute is where
yeah,
your
it
data
was really
is.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's something like I had a hard time like grokking it at first, but once you do, it's like, oh my God, this is so powerful. Um, and like I said, I would love to bring jobs back to Manta, but V1 had scaling issues, um, and those would need to be worked out. And like honestly, it would be easier to implement a new architecture for jobs on top of Manta V2 than it would be to update Manta V1 to a newer version of Node.
yeah. I was,
So,
and
you know,
oh, go ahead.
if you're considering like Manta V1 node upgrade so that it's not decrepitly ancient versus re-implementing jobs from scratch on Manta V2, re-implementing jobs from scratch on Manta V2 is much more likely to happen.
I was gonna say too. It's kind of funny because um, the old versions of Node that were in there and Joyent was the Node company. In fact, there's a documentary that just
Yeah,
came out about Node that I just watched. Um, it's mainly about the IO.js fork and that coming back together. But there's they actually had Scott, a former CEO of Joyent, CEO while Brian and I were there, who it discusses some of that discusses some of the things about that in the documentary. So I would recommend checking that out if you have the time. We're kind of out of time here because we do have to drop. I got to drop,
yeah, we're
but
way over.
yeah, we're way over. But this is great because I wanted to get some more participation, and this is what I don't really just want to have to talk the whole time, and I enjoy hearing things that people are doing. So just wanted to say thank you. We'll continue to make sure we have enough time for Q&A and topics that everybody wants to discuss going forward. Just I'll make sure to build that in. Um, so I
Yeah,
appreciate the
and all of these
questions.
are really good questions. So like feel
Yeah.
free to keep them coming in the regular Discord chat if we
Yeah,
shut down the audio today.
exactly. Yeah. So if you have more stuff, like, it'll be more async, of course, but, or if there's something really cool, if you want to hold it to the next office hours, you can, but, drop stuff in Discord but this is the place to do it, really have that discussion, but we'll continue that on Discord. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you on the channels, and thank you again.
See y'all next time.
See y'all next time. Yep. Thank you.